My name is Erica, and I grew up in our family's Italian restaurant, a charming little place in the heart of the city that had been in our family for 3 generations. My great-grandfather started it, and by the time I was born, my grandfather was running the show. The restaurant was more than just a business, it was our legacy, our heart, our home. My father was different. While Grandpa lived and breathed the restaurant business, Dad just existed in it. He never wanted more responsibility, always content to remain in his father's shadow. "Why don't you take over the management, Thomas?" Grandpa would ask him repeatedly. "It's time you stepped up." Dad would just shake his head and say, "I'm happy doing what I'm doing, Pop. The delivery runs suit me fine." Maybe things would have stayed that way forever if Mom hadn't died in that car accident when I was 12. The memory of that day still haunts me, the police at our door, Dad's face crumpling, my world shattering into a million pieces. For 3 years, it was just Dad and me, living in our house surrounded by Mom's photos and memories. Then everything changed. Dad met Patricia. I still remember the day he told me he was getting remarried. We were sitting at our old kitchen table, the one Mom had picked out years ago, when he reached across and took my hand. "Erica, honey," he said, his voice tentative. "I have something to tell you. Patricia and we're getting married." I forced a smile even as my stomach twisted into knots. That's great, Dad. "She'll be moving in next month," he continued, looking relieved at my apparent acceptance. "She has some wonderful ideas for the house." Those wonderful ideas turned out to be the first warning sign of what was to come. Within weeks of moving in, Patricia had begun her campaign to erase every trace of my mother from our home. One day, I came home from school to find all of Mom's photos gone. "Where are the pictures?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Patricia was arranging flowers in a new vase, one of many changes she'd already made. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It's time to move forward, don't you think? We can't live in the past forever." That was just the beginning. Soon, every piece of furniture, every decoration, every memory of my mother was replaced with Patricia's idea of style, all cream-colored walls and rustic Provençal furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine rather than a home where people actually lived. It wasn't enough for Patricia to remake our house, she decided to remake me too. One Saturday morning, she barged into my room with armfuls of shopping bags, her face lit up with what she probably thought was generous excitement. "Erica, darling, I've been shopping." She started pulling out clothes in pastel colors and flowing fabrics that I would never have chosen for myself. "These will look so much better than those awful baggy things you wear." "My clothes are fine," I protested, but it was like talking to a wall. No, they absolutely won't do," she insisted, already clearing space in my closet. "You're part of my family now, and we need to present a unified image. What would people think if you went around looking like that?" And so began the parade of unwanted outfits. Floral dresses replaced my comfortable jeans, delicate blouses replaced my t-shirts, and somehow, I found myself wearing shoes that looked pretty but felt like instruments of torture. The worst part was the photo shoots. God, the photo shoots. Patricia was obsessed with documenting our perfect family life on social media. "Smile, Erica. For heaven's sake, try to look happy." Patricia would snap, as I stood awkwardly in whatever outfit she'd forced me into that day. "Nobody wants to see that sour face. We need to show everyone what a wonderful life we have." Dad would just stand there in his assigned position, smiling his vacant smile, going along with whatever Patricia wanted. That was Dad all over, never making waves, never taking a stand. Sometimes I wondered if he even noticed how miserable I was during these marathon photo sessions. The only place I felt like myself anymore was at the restaurant with Grandpa. While Patricia was busy playing dress-up with our lives, I was learning the real family business from the ground up. I started as a waitress in high school, learning how to handle difficult customers and juggle multiple tables at once. Later, Grandpa trusted me enough to work as a cashier, teaching me about the financial side of things. "You've got a head for business, Piccola," he'd tell me proudly as we went over the books together. Much more than your father ever did. He even let me help develop new menu items, though we always stayed true to our traditional Italian roots. Innovation within tradition, he'd say, that's the secret to lasting success. I thought it would go on like that forever. I graduated high school with honors and got accepted into the faculty of management at college. Grandpa was so proud, he saw it as me preparing to eventually take over the restaurant. You'll do great things with this place someday, he told me the day I left for college. But life had other plans. Near the end of my first year, I got the call that changed everything. Grandpa had died suddenly, a heart attack in his sleep. Just like that, he was gone. The reading of the will brought one final surprise. Grandpa had left me his apartment. The restaurant, though, that went to Dad. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, hearing those words and feeling a cold dread settle in my stomach. Because I knew, with absolute certainty, that it wouldn't be Dad running the restaurant. The ink wasn't even dry on Grandpa's death certificate when Patricia swooped in to take control. I was still at college when Dad called to tell me about the exciting changes Patricia was making to modernize the restaurant. When I came home that first weekend, I stood across the street from our restaurant, unable to move. The familiar warm golden sign that had read Giuseppe's for nearly a century was gone. In its place was some trendy-looking monstrosity with purple neon lighting that read Fusion 360. I felt physically sick. What do you think? Patricia's voice came from behind me, dripping with self-satisfaction. She was holding a stack of glossy new business cards. I took one mechanically, my fingers numb. There it was in fancy script, Patricia Morrison, owner and executive director. Inside was even worse. The cozy, intimate atmosphere that had made our restaurant feel like home to generations of families was gone. Patricia had turned it into what looked like every other trendy restaurant in the city, all chrome and glass and uncomfortable-looking furniture. But the real horror was the menu. I picked it up and felt my heart sink further with each page. Our carefully curated selection of traditional Italian dishes, perfected over decades, had been replaced with what looked like a world tour of random foods. There was sushi next to beef bourguignon, pad thai alongside fish and chips. Isn't it wonderful? Patricia gushed. Now we can attract everyone. Why limit ourselves to just Italian food when we can offer everything? I watched in silence as a plate of what was supposed to be pasta alla norma went back to the kitchen, the customer complaining it tasted nothing like what they remembered. Of course it didn't. Our old chef, Mario, who had worked alongside my grandfather for 20 years, was gone. So were all the other cooks who had known our recipes by heart. In their place was a rotating cast of confused new hires, none of whom seemed to stay longer than a few weeks. How could they? Patricia expected them to somehow master cuisines from 3 different continents simultaneously. During my spring break from college, I came home to visit my father and Patricia. The moment I walked into the house, I could tell something was up. Patricia was practically bouncing with excitement as she ushered me into the living room, where papers were spread across the coffee table. Erica, perfect timing. Wait until you hear our big news. Her eyes had that manic gleam I'd learned to dread. We're expanding. We're going to open a whole chain of restaurants. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? Yes, she pulled out a folder stuffed with glossy real estate listings. I've already looked at several locations. We'll take out a big loan from the bank, and before you know it, we'll have Fusion 360 restaurants all over the city. My years of business classes kicked in immediately. Have you done any market research? Written up a business plan? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. You need to study the competition, analyze the market saturation, calculate projected revenue streams. Patricia cut me off with a dismissive wave. Oh, please. We don't need all that bureaucratic nonsense. I can feel it in my bones, this is going to be huge. The money will start rolling in immediately. I looked at Dad, hoping to see some sign of rational thought, but he just sat there with that same passive smile. I took a deep breath. That's not how it works, I explained, drawing on everything I'd learned in my management classes. New restaurant chains typically operate at a loss for the first few years. You need substantial capital reserves to survive that period. Have you calculated how you'll manage the loan payments if? When, Patricia interrupted. When the money starts coming in, not if. Who's going to run all these restaurants? I asked, already dreading the answer. Dad finally spoke up. Patricia will handle everything. I'll help out where I can. I couldn't hold back anymore. Are you serious? She has no experience running even one restaurant successfully, let alone a chain. The current restaurant is barely staying afloat, and you want to multiply that problem? The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd crossed a line. Patricia's face turned red, then purple. How dare you, she shrieked, standing up so suddenly her chair crashed to the floor. You think you know everything because you're taking some college classes? Your father has been in this business for decades. He's a successful businessman, and you're trying to diminish all his accomplishments. Dad delivers groceries, I said quietly. He's never run anything. You're just jealous. Patricia's voice got even louder. Jealous that we're going to be successful without you. You're trying to drive a wedge between me and your father because you can't stand to see us happy. I'm trying to stop you from bankrupting our family's legacy, I said. This restaurant was built by my great-grandfather, maintained by my grandfather, and now you're going to destroy it with your delusions of grandeur. Thomas, Patricia turned to my father, tears suddenly appearing in her eyes. Are you going to let her talk to me like this? In our own house? Dad stood up, his face red with anger. Get out, he said, his voice hard and cold in a way I'd never heard before. Pack your things and get out of my house right now. Dad. Get out, he roared, pointing at the door. And don't you dare come back until you learn some respect. I stood there for a moment, looking at this man who used to be my father, this woman who destroyed our family, this house that used to be my home. Then I turned and walked out, knowing I wouldn't be back. After that explosive night at Dad's house, I threw myself into my studies and tried to pretend I didn't have a family anymore. It wasn't hard, they made it clear they didn't want me around anyway. No calls, no messages, not even a card on my birthday. The silence spoke volumes. My Aunt Marie became my lifeline to family news, though most of what she told me made my heart ache. Patricia's poisoning your father's mind, she told me over coffee one Sunday. She's got him convinced that the whole family is jealous of their success. Can you believe it? She told him we're all too poor and unsuccessful to associate with them anymore. I stirred my coffee slowly. Are they still talking to anyone? Marie shook her head. One by one, she's cut everyone off. Your cousin Tony tried to visit last month, they wouldn't even open the door. Said they were too busy with their restaurant empire. Ah yes, the famous restaurant empire. They'd gone ahead with their expansion plans, just as Patricia had wanted. Through the family grapevine, I heard about each new opening, 5 restaurants in total, each one more confused than the last. They kept the Fusion 360 name but added Italian heritage to the signs, as if that somehow made up for the fact that they were serving sushi next to chicken parmesan. Meanwhile, I graduated college with honors and landed a job at a corporate consulting firm. Within 2 years, I had my own office and a team working under me. My bank account grew, I bought myself a nice car, and I started thinking about buying a house. I was having lunch with Aunt Marie when she dropped the bomb I'd been half expecting for years. The restaurants are failing, she said, pushing her salad around her plate. They've already closed 3 of them. The 4th one is on its last legs. All they have left now is your grandfather's place. I should have felt sad. I should have felt concerned for my father. Instead, I felt a small, mean spark of satisfaction. I tried to squash it, but it was there, a little voice in my head saying, I told you so. The banks breathing down their necks, Marie continued. They took out loans for all those expansions, you know. Used the original restaurant as collateral. Patricia's still telling everyone it's just temporary setbacks, but the numbers don't lie, I finished for her. If there was one thing my job had taught me, it was that you couldn't bluff your way past a balance sheet. The call came on a Tuesday evening while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office. When I saw Dad's number on my phone screen, my heart nearly stopped. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. "Erica?" His voice was urgent, almost panicked. "You need to come over right away. It's a matter of life and death." My mind immediately went to the worst scenarios: heart attack, cancer, terminal illness. Despite everything that had happened between us, he was still my father. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said, already packing my briefcase. The drive to my childhood home felt surreal. The neighborhood hadn't changed, but my parents' house had. The once pristine lawn was overgrown, the Provençal-style shutters Patricia had insisted on installing were hanging crooked, and the fancy trim she'd added was peeling. Gone was the showcase home she'd created. In its place stood a house that looked tired. Dad opened the door before I could knock. His hair had gone completely gray, and deep lines creased his face. Behind him, I could see the inside of the house had fared no better than the exterior. The expensive furniture was dusty, the artisanal wallpaper was peeling, and there was a general air of neglect that Patricia would never have tolerated in the past. "Erica, honey, come in." Patricia emerged from the kitchen, trying to sound cheerful, but looking as worn as the house. "I've made dinner. Your favorite lasagna." I wanted to point out that she'd never known what my favorite anything was, but I held my tongue. They led me to the dining room, where 3 places were set with what remained of Patricia's fancy china collection. I noticed several pieces were missing from the set. "You're looking well," Dad said, studying me as we sat down. "Very successful. Friends tell me you're doing incredibly well at your job. Senior consultant now, isn't it? And is that a new Mercedes I saw in the driveway?" I took a small bite of the mediocre lasagna. "The job's fine. How are you both? Dad, are you feeling okay? When you called about life and death, I assumed." "Oh, your father's health is fine," Patricia interrupted, something sharp glinting in her eyes. "Though our situation is rather desperate." I put down my fork. "What situation?" They exchanged glances. "Well," Dad began, "the restaurant, the last restaurant, we're going to lose it." "The bank is being completely unreasonable," Patricia jumped in. "All we need is a little help to get back on our feet. We have a solid business plan this time, I've worked it all out." She reached for a folder that looked suspiciously like the one from years ago. "How much?" I asked flatly. 300,000, Dad said quickly. "Just a small loan, really. With your income and reputation, the banks would give it to you in a heartbeat. Or you could use your savings, or maybe take out a mortgage on your grandfather's apartment." I felt slightly sick. "So there's no actual emergency? No one's dying?" "This is an emergency," Patricia insisted. "This is your family's legacy we're talking about. And we've already mortgaged our house, maxed out our credit cards, taken out every loan we could find." She leaned forward intensely. "But I know exactly what we need to do differently this time. I've planned everything out. With your apartment as collateral, we could get the loan today. By next month, we'd be turning a profit again. No, I won't give you the money. I won't take out a loan. And I definitely won't put Grandpa's apartment up as collateral." I pushed my barely touched lasagna away. "The best thing you can do now is file for bankruptcy before you dig yourselves any deeper." "How can you be so heartless?" Dad's voice cracked. "This isn't just any restaurant, this is your great-grandfather Giuseppe's legacy. Nearly 100 years of family history. Everything our family built. The restaurant you're trying to save isn't Giuseppe's anymore," I said. "It hasn't been since you let Patricia turn it into whatever she wanted it to be. That's ancient history." Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the cheap wine slosh in its glasses. "Can't you put aside your petty grudges for once? This is about family." I looked him straight in the eyes. This isn't about grudges, Dad. This is about basic business sense. The restaurant is failing because of bad management decisions, not because of lack of funds. Throwing more money at it won't fix the underlying problems. You don't know what you're talking about, Patricia interjected. With my new business plan. Your business plans are exactly why the restaurant is failing, I cut her off. And I won't throw away my savings or my grandfather's apartment trying to save something that can't be saved. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I'm sorry, but the answer is no. If you walk out that door, Dad's voice was thick with anger, don't ever come back. I paused in the doorway, thinking of all the times he'd said that before. Goodbye, Dad. 3 months later, I was drinking my morning coffee and flipping through the local business section when I saw it. Historic Italian restaurant for sale, bank foreclosure. The asking price was surprisingly low, the bank clearly wanted to offload it quickly. I stared at the listing for a long time. I'd been saving up for a down payment on a house, had even started looking at properties. But seeing that familiar storefront in the grainy newspaper photo stirred something in me. Not nostalgia exactly, but possibility. The next day, I contacted a business broker I knew from work. I need you to handle a purchase for me, I told her. But my name can't appear anywhere on the paperwork. It took some creative legal maneuvering and the entirety of my savings, but 2 weeks later, the broker called to tell me it was done. Giuseppe's was mine, though on paper, it belonged to a shell corporation my lawyer had set up. The renovation took 2 months. Every evening after my consulting job, I'd come to the restaurant and work late into the night, using old photographs as my guide. The garish purple neon came down, replaced by the warm golden lighting I remembered from childhood. The chrome and glass disappeared, making way for the original dark wood tables my great-grandfather had chosen almost a century ago. I found most of them in storage, covered in dust, but salvageable. The old photographs went back on the walls, my great-grandfather Giuseppe in his chef's whites, Grandpa teaching me how to make pasta when I was barely tall enough to reach the counter. Each picture told a piece of our story. The best part was tracking down the old staff. Mario, our head chef, nearly cried when I called him. I'd been cooking Chinese food at a takeout place, he confessed. It broke my heart, but bills are bills. Come home, I told him. We're bringing back the old menu. Every dish exactly as Grandpa taught us. Within a week, I had most of the original kitchen staff back. Even Angela, our old manager, left her corporate job to return. This place is in my blood, she said simply. The reopening was quiet, just a small welcome back sign and the original menu. But word spread quickly. Old customers started trickling in, then flooding back, overjoyed to find their favorite dishes, tasting exactly as they remembered. I was in the kitchen talking to Mario about possibly adding one of Grandpa's experimental recipes to the menu when I heard the commotion from the dining room. When I walked out, I found Dad and Patricia standing in the middle of the restaurant, staring open-mouthed at the transformation. What is this? Patricia's voice was shrill. What have you done? Restored it, I said simply. You planned this all along, she shrieked, drawing stares from the diners. You deliberately refused to help us so you could swoop in and steal it for pennies. Dad's face was red with fury. Is this your revenge? Letting us lose everything so you could take it for yourself? I looked around at the warm, bustling restaurant, at the photos on the walls, at the satisfied customers enjoying their meals, at Mario peeking proudly from the kitchen door, and felt nothing but peace. This isn't revenge, I said. This is protecting what 4 generations of our family built. This is keeping Giuseppe's legacy alive the way it should be. They left in a storm of threats and accusations, Patricia promising lawsuits, Dad declaring me dead to him. I watched them go, feeling not triumph or satisfaction, just a quiet certainty that I'd done the right thing. The restaurant isn't making much money yet, we're breaking even most months, sometimes running a small loss. I keep my day job, letting Angela handle the daily operations while I handle the big picture decisions. Mario's training a new apprentice in the kitchen, teaching the old recipes to a new generation. The other day, a young girl came in with her parents, regular customers now. She pointed at the photo of me and Grandpa making pasta. "Is that you?" she asked. "It is," I smiled. "Want to learn how to make pasta like that?" Her eyes lit up, and I thought about legacy, not just preserving it, but passing it on. Maybe in a few years, when the restaurant is turning a profit, I'll start teaching cooking classes like Grandpa used to. Keep the traditions alive, not just in recipes, but in the hearts and hands of a new generation.